Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you for having me at Agile on the Beach. And this is Loving Grace Part 1, an Agile Retrospective. So I've been working on an interactive art piece, and I thought, let's do a big retrospective thing. Let's get all my ideas and thoughts into a presentation and deliver it in front of everyone as well. And that's useful for me because I'm recently started my own company, Controlled Frenzy. And as a counterpoint to the last talk with the Land Registry, which is a team of hundreds, I'm a team of one. I'm one person wearing many different hats, so I'm the project manager for my projects, and I'm also a scrum master, and the product owner, and the developer. So I kind of shift between all these kind of different roles and states in my head, as well as trying to run the business part as well. So I think it's a really interesting point to kind of do this and use this kind of space to kind of go out and hopefully do something entertaining. So this is the Chris on Twitter, and as I said, we'll do questions at the end, and hopefully this should be fun. So I start off with kind of the beginning, the invocation. So this is Tony, a few months at the start of this year, knew I was starting something, knew I was doing something for myself, and he came and asked, could you make something for my event? And me being me, I agreed, and that event became FutureSync. So a little conference up in Plymouth, few tracks and an opportunity in a space to show something. There's a corner with a projector and a screen, do something with that space. Great, that's the most open brief I've ever had. I can do whatever I want, I can build into this. Let's make something, let's go for that. And it sort of became this kind of algorithmic, interactive art piece as a proactive prototype. So something that kind of generates more questions and ideas than necessarily it might answer. So something at the very early stage of that kind of discovery process in there as well. And that became Loving Grace Part 1. And I thought, rather than leave you to the end, let's go straight to it and demo it. So So you're hearing a soundscape, you're hearing a landscape, and this is being influenced and built up. So the visual that will be created comes from a representation of you. So I'm going to start by creating a ghost or a shadow of myself. So as I start talking into this microphone, shapes and patterns start emerging. So what's happening here is, along as understanding how I'm talking, my intonation, the bass and the highs in my voice, this system is listening to what I'm saying. So it's transcribing everything I'm saying, and it's trying to build a personality and a profile of me. And as it learns, it warps and adapts and transforms. And once it's understood what I said, it's trying to figure out the meaning behind it. So it's doing personality analysis, and it's doing sentiment analysis of all the words I'm saying and the way I'm speaking them to generate this ghost, this shadow, this representation of me. And the colors and the shapes all change corresponding to that data and information. And as I move the microphone away, this becomes my representation. This becomes my version of me that exists digitally, online forever. So this information gets squirreled up to a server and then is stored, ready to be used, turned into an API, powering other artists and powering a network of other systems and things. And at FutureSync, we invited everyone to come up to the projection, put on some headphones, enjoy the sound, enjoy the instructions, and start to build something just through their voice, just through how they're saying and speaking something. And that is Loving Grace Part 1. And the demo worked. Yay! Small little things. So we have our system, our endpoint, what we create, what we had. And then I need to, at this point, I'm at the beginning, I'm at January, and thinking, now it's the next thing is to kind of figure out what the project is. And I kind of think there's kind of like 4 main stages to creative projects, and they kind of fit in with the Agile methodology and Agile world really well. There's kind of the ideation or the discovery phase where you're coming up with your ideas, you're figuring out your influences, and what you might like to do. That's where you come up with your objectives and your user stories. What's the kind of things there? Then there's the constraint phase, which is how do you take all those big ideas and turn it into something you can actually deliver. So how do you realize your limitations on your time, your budget, and things? And we'll talk through that. Then, of course, there's the sprint. There's the actual making of the thing, actually producing something and building all the bits together and figuring out how to manage that. And then the retrospective, which is almost this part, which is taking all that experience and turning it into something I can reiterate to myself. So this is a little bit of a therapy session for me as well, just kind of getting all these ideas and thoughts out and structured into something. So we use that retrospective as a kind of the reflection point, which is what this is. So let's get straight on it with the kind of the ideation phase. So, and part one of that, inspiration. So as a consultant, as kind of as a creative technologist, I spend a lot of time working with clients and discussing all sorts of different types of new technologies and phases and transformations. Kind of exactly like what we were talking about at the end keynote yesterday, that there's these big changes that shift businesses and shift models in different directions. And it's a really interesting place to work with and prototype ideas and kind of get those first things out, those first explorations of those. And the biggest one at the moment that I found working with business is artificial intelligence. And the main conversation I have about artificial intelligence is this idea of aggression. So your AI is going to take your job. It's probably going to be Skynet, so it's probably going to kill us all in robots and things. Or it's probably not very ethically thing, or there's a big, like, it's all kind of rooted in kind of this aggression, this kind of pushing away or pushing towards something, pushing humans out of the loop. And I kind of think there's some more interesting narratives going on. Like the amount of times you talk about AI, everyone brings up the Terminator because that's such an ingrained cultural point in there, ingrained cultural point in kind of everything we do as technology people. So there are different conversations, there are new things to have, new explorations. And I'm going to play for you Richard Brautigan's All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, and which is a poem which is kind of exploring an idea of nature and technology, of going back to something. And I'm going to play that video for you now.
I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think, right now please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think, it has to be, of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace.
Thank you, Adam Curtis, for the clip there. But so kind of what this poem is exploring is this change to the narrative, change to the approach of technology, where it becomes part of ourselves, becomes almost overwhelmingly and overwhelmingly kind of on top of humanity. So some people kind of exploring this in this idea of the singularity, that the growth of technology will kind of explode and become something we don't understand. It becomes godlike, it becomes beyond us, inaccessible. And what Richard's proposing here is, this comes from like the Whole Earth Catalogue. It's 50 years ago, so it's right in the kind of the hippie, the Woodstock kind of era, is this potential like dehumanization, I'm not going to say dehumanization, but that's kind of the right thing, is that maybe we take a step back from all our complexities as humans. You're already seeing this as a political discourse. So the idea of universal basic income comes from this like, computers are here, computers are looking after us. Do we need to work? What is even the idea of work or manual labor or even creative labor when there's AIs, artificial intelligence, is doing this for us? And it's a really, really interesting kind of rich place to explore. And you've got science fiction, you've got media exploring this idea already. So 2014, this is Black Mirror, White Christmas, and this is the cookie, the egg. So in this story, and spoilers if you haven't watched it, you go for surgery and you have a little cookie implanted behind your ear. And that's then listening to everything you're doing and your brainwaves and your thought patterns, and it's creating a perfect copy of you, which knows everything about your desires, your wants, what you prioritize, how you like your toast. And it sits inside as this intelligence watching over you, looking after you, being there with you, present throughout your life. And it's interesting because this is you. This is kind of the copy. This is an extension. So does this AI, does this copy have the same human rights as you do? Does it have the same idea behind the scenes? Is it human? Is it conscious? And Black Mirror is kind of, that episode explores that really, really well. And of course, goes to kind of the logical extremes and toaster, making toast. And I really suggest you watch that episode, even though it's not Christmas. But of course, these kind of devices, we already have them. They're already there. So the Amazon Echo, Amazon Alexa, how many of you have one of these in your kitchen? I certainly do. There's a few other hands and things going up. I still can't get used to calling out for something and then it turning up the next day. So I need Tassimo pods, and they just show up at my house. And that kind of invisible technology, that boundless technology, suddenly interface design becomes completely different, because you're not looking at something in a screen, you're just having a conversation and intuiting what someone wants from that. And obviously that's led to a big development in technologies and things that we can kind of use and adapt into artworks, into creative explorations of this space. One of which is Replica. This is in beta at the moment. You can download this on the App Store, but you can't get access without an invite. And Replica is the egg. So Replica, you can talk to it, and it's a chatbot that builds up a profile of you and then starts responding to you back in your own voice. So the idea with this is that you're almost talking to your consciousness. You're talking to yourself outside of your own body in your phone. So you're having this dialogue, this conversation with something that's a copy of you, that's the things, and it's all those same things again, made real. Made real in something there. So you kind of got this framework for artificial intelligence, and I'm really interested in kind of algorithmic art and creativity, and of course that really goes back to all sorts of work and mathematics. So this is the Friday Mosque in Afghanistan, and it's a really great example of Islamic algorithmic pattern-based art. And the growth in that, the explosion comes because you can't, in Islam, you aren't allowed to represent Muhammad, God, or any kind of any of God's creatures. You can represent things humans create, and one of the things humans create is maths. We use maths to understand the world as a language, and that's where these patterns, these beautiful shapes and geometries come from as well. And it's a really interesting exploration, and it's a point in there as well. And there are people doing lots of work in this field at the moment. Holly Knowles is an algorithmic artist who does everything by hand. And he spends weeks and weeks and weeks drawing out and building these beautiful artworks. So this one here is just a big cube with every line drawn because of rules that are on the side of each piece of the page. So he's drawing and manually building the algorithm and showing it to you in that space. And then Danish artist called Leah, who's working with computational algorithmic art and really focusing on the interaction with that. So she's got two works of hers I've picked out at the moment. One is touch-based, so this is on a big touch screen, and as you press onto something, where your hand is located then generates these forms through your touch and through where you are. And on the other side, you've got a physical interaction. So this is just a couple of sliders, which behind the scenes are just changing variables, but gives agency to the audience to create something, to make something for themselves. They just threw a few sliders, and then suddenly they're an algorithmic artist. Suddenly they can be invested and brought into this space as well. And of course, I can't go talking about representing humans on a screen through an algorithm without talking about the treachery of images, without talking about what the representation is. So if you don't know, this was in René Magritte in 1928, drew the pipe, and he's a surrealist artist, and what he's saying explicitly to the audience is that's not a pipe, that's a collection of paint strokes, of drawings on a screen, and it's not the thing. So it's explicitly saying to the audience, you're not looking at a thing, you're looking at a representation of a thing. Likewise, with kind of the ghosts and shadows and things I'm creating, I've deliberately divorced myself as the engineer, as the technologist, from knowing what each of the things the AIs understand about the voice from the visual. So as it's warping, I can't tell whether something's angry or hopeful, whether someone's extroverted, or what their voice was. I've deliberately left that out and let people intuit that for themselves. So I'm not kind of preloading that conversation, I'm letting people do that for themselves. So we've got our kind of inspirations and our big bulges of ideas and thoughts about where we go. So now it's time to set out our objectives and our user stories and thinking, okay, what am I going to achieve? What am I going to do? And you'll start seeing a problem with these. So, okay, I want something that looks and sounds good. So I'm going to play around with this processing, some algorithmic art. I'm going to do something in 3D. I'm going to use like bright neon colors and do something like that. I want the audience to ask questions, so I'm going to layer on a narrative. I'm going to say something interesting as I talk to them and bring them into it. I'm going to make sure they have that conversation with themselves and with me as the artist. I want the audience to have something to take away with them, so I want them to be able to have a printout of the thing they've created and a website they can go to potentially see more information. And I want the interaction to be as simple as possible. So, thinking, it's not going to be a complex touch screen, let's make it simple. Let's just make it voice-based and buy a nice microphone that I can use for other purposes as well. And I want something to own, something for me. I'm setting up my own business, I'm doing my own thing, so I'm going to take charge of it. I'm going to be my own client and product owner and make something for myself, make my own product. And you kind of see the problem. It's all I want. And that kind of comes from me transitioning to that from not just acting as a client to make something cool for Tony's conference to, I'm going to own this, I'm going to make something, I'm going to do things. But that shifts me into that mold where I'm not really understanding what people are getting or intuiting for the thing I've made. And that's like a problem with using this process. And it's only through externalizing that, it's only through talking to people and sharing what I'm doing and sharing prototypes and bouncing off of people that I can actually understand. So I can't say that I understand everything I want to deliver in this process. All I can do is communicate what I'm making to other people and seeing what they want back, seeing what they want to explore and they want to put in as well. So more work to do there, more things to develop, more ideas and thoughts and stuff to share. And that kind of I want comes from that there still isn't a defined product. There still isn't an end point. The end point is there's a deadline and there's something I've got to show. And it's not even a product, it's an outcome. It's just a result of a process that I happen to be showing at specific times. So we're kind of going for the ideation, we kind of set everything out, we kind of set our stall on what we want to do, and now we kind of need to start constraining that down into something. If you don't constrain your ideas, you're never going to deliver something. You're never going to get something, because you're never going to get the thing you really want. So you need to start thinking about your constraints and what you have access to. And I kind of break these down into 4 things. So the deadline, the budget, skills you have, and your energy. So start off with the deadline. And of course, time moves quickly. I didn't quite realize it was June and it's time there. But it's an important thing to reiterate. There's no cost of delay here. There's no complex thing. I can't push something back because there's an event on I just happen to be at. I'm not the main attraction, I'm not the main thing, I'm just there in a corner, making the most out of the space. So if I miss it, if I don't get to that point, I miss out. Flat out, done. There's no wiggle room, there's no movement in that. So the constraint becomes, what do I need to cut out to make sure I make that deadline? What do I need to make sure and move away to make sure I get to that point with something I'm happy with showing? So we kind of reduce the complexity. I was thinking about doing something similar to Replica with the voice talking back to you, but that proved to be very complicated, and I don't have lots of VC funding to make that work. So, and those decisions, those cuts come all the way up to the deadline. It's just thinking, how do we make this simpler? How do we focus on what needs to be delivered and what needs to be there? And of course, budget is a big constraint as well. There is funding for this kind of thing. This is the Arts Council England Grants for the Arts Application Overview by Rachel Dobbs, which isn't the actual form, it's a cheat sheet for the actual form that exists on something called Grantium. And it's legendarily arbitrary. So here's an example in the middle there. So please provide a brief summary of your relevant artistic work, experience and achievements in no more than 1,500 characters. Not words, characters. So sum up your entire artistic achievement in about 10 tweets. Yeah. You kind of see where this is going. You see why there's a whole industry of people who will write funding applications for you as artists and then just take a cut of the money that comes back as well, because this is complex, this is arbitrary, and creative people just talk and talk and talk and talk, as you can evidence right here and right now. So money, that's like I could get for stuff, but there's a short deadline, so really I'm not investing someone else's money, I'm only investing mine. And realistically, at this point where I'm starting my business, I'm investing my time. Now, I was in the lucky position that I had enough work, enough money, enough provision that I could take the risk to make something. I could take the risk to take the time, which I could be billing out to someone else to instead put it into something. And that's a very lucky position to be in. I have to touch myself and keep myself grounded on that, but not everyone has that, so I need to make sure I support and set a standard for that. And I also need to admit to myself that sometimes I need to get other people involved. I need to go beyond that team of one and bring things out to others. And one example of that is just the sound. If I started on the piano, you wouldn't like what you heard. It would probably sound very, very, very bad. Well, I'm just saying. And likewise, I'm never going to ask someone to do something for me for free. I'm always going to give someone back that time, that money. So I'm always going to pay someone to do it or provide them with other opportunities and things. So obviously the oatmeal comic is the perfect representation of that. And I want to set that standard in my own company, my own practice now. I want to say, look, I don't want to even ask you to do something for me if I'm not willing to pay you to do it. I'm not doing favors. I want people to be involved and part of this business and actually value people's time to go, yes, here's money, do something with me. And the person who did the sound for me is Sam Ray, who's a chiptune artist and really amazing work. And that's what you heard as we were talking to Loving Grace as well, as we were building that voice, is the soundscape was changing as it was getting more complex and more evolved. And Sam kind of helped me develop that. And it was we had a really great jamming session. So I was working on the visual, commenting out code and changing things and getting something while he was making the audio. So he was just playing around with sound effects and loops, and we were seeing what was coming up with as well. So it was it's kind of pair programming, but just with doing something really creative and really fun. So budget and now skill. So obviously I have my own abilities and things, but I can't always know how to do something when I start a project. So I need to admit to myself at first, I usually have no idea what I'm doing, and I need to get across a skill gap. I need to learn, I need to develop. And this is the most important thing I have, is my ability to question myself and know how to learn and how to get over this stuff. So my first kind of questions is, how do I get to these two gaps? So it's not just going all the way to delivery, it's actually getting halfway through the process, actually being able to prototype something or make a minimum viable version of something is the first gap to cross. And the second one, can you ship it, is can you polish that? Can you turn it into something that's actually a professional product something that won't immediately fall over as soon as someone touches it or says the wrong thing or does something wrong. And these are gaps across and questions to ask. So what do I need to learn to get across the skill gap? Can I learn it in the time as well? Because there's constraints and other projects and other things going on. Does this make sense to do? And is it worth learning it as well? Anything I learn, I could reapply to other projects, other things, other systems or clients or presentations. So if I learn one thing, I can reuse it in lots of different ways. And that is a useful place to put myself in as kind of an independent person, because I always need to be finding work. I always need to be finding clients. And I'm usually agreeing to something. I don't entirely know how I'm going to deliver or build it by the first point. So, and that leads me to strange situations where I'm in the cafe at Exeter Business School hacking a doll by sticking a Raspberry Pi in it and Alexa, so the doll talks to you and gives you advice about the museum and talks to you about the Chinese manufacturers who made it as well. So it's ever so slightly sinister, but it's a fun project, but that's a future one. And on top of all of that, the last thing is constraint is my own energy, like my own will to put in time and thoughts into this. Now, it's an interesting point for me because I'm kind of escaping the world of academia and going into the world of business. And it's nice, and there's actually money there as well, which really helps. But as well as setting up my own business and getting clients, I've got to manage my time, manage my own creativity to get to that process. I was taking a picture, so I left that there. So Andy Mantell, another developer at the RAND registry, he asked a brilliant question, like, how do you manage your own creativity? How do you put that into a product and things? And the question is, you kind of can't. You make the most of it when it's there. So with the ideation stuff we were talking about earlier, a lot of that is just, I'm sitting down or I'm trying to get to sleep and the thoughts are in my brain. I'm just thinking of stuff and connecting things together and I'm looking at stuff and then I just write that down and get something out. Likewise with the visuals, it's kind of setting up opportunities to be creative with those points as well. So jamming sessions is one thing, but also if I'm in the right mood to play around with something, I'll do that. I'll take that opportunity to get something in there. And with delivering a long-term creative project, you kind of want to make sure you've got enough time before your deadline to have those creative moments. Because the creativity is only one part of the whole project, as we'll get into in the sprints. There's a whole other set of things you might have to build in there as well. So you can kind of use that skill and put that in at the right places to give you that kind of that leg up, that good thing there as well. And likewise, sharing it with people really helps as well. Like the amount of times I've had conversations with people that struck off new ideas, that started new things and got me going in different directions. Sharing it is such a huge part of this process. Getting that feedback and not keeping it in your head constantly is so valuable. So, and again, hence this. So we've got our constraints. We've got our deadline, our budget, our skill, and we've got an idea of the energy and what we want to put into this as well. And we know that the constraints are going to focus down our objectives into something deliverable. So we kind of now know that, okay, so I'm going to focus on the voice thing, and I'm going to not spend too much time on it. I'm going to use microservices, and I'm going to keep things as simple as possible, not trying to get like processing to do voice analysis or another thing to do something else. It's actually, okay, these technologies are sensible and do things, let's connect them together, let's put them together. So now we get to the sprint. Now we actually get to making the thing. And the kind of the things in that sprint, the things in the making, kind of breaking down when at least you're doing this kind of interactive works into these three strands. And this is very similar to, say, doing a stage show or an improvised jazz performance on the piano. You've kind of got these three main things. So you've got the creative work, which we were talking about earlier, which you can kind of preload. You can do it at times where it makes sense. The infrastructure, which is actually putting everything else in place to enable you to actually do the thing, and the stuff that's on the day. So what's the little things, like where are you going to be? What's the projectors going to be set up? Do you have people around you as well? So I need to make, so I start off and I make the list and I think, what are all the bits and pieces that need to go into this sprint and what do I need to make sure that's there? So of course, Processing sketch for the visuals, you've already seen that. It's a Java-based language for doing these generative works, and it's really fun. It's really easy to get going as well. I need to write a Node.js script for the speech-to-text, and that's the Google Cloud Speech Service. This is really useful because it's really easy to implement, and it sends an event every time someone stops talking or pauses. So you get just a little JavaScript event or a promise that you can then feed into other things as well. So for this, it's really useful because I don't need to press something or tell the computer someone stopped talking. The API provides that for me. So it makes another interaction simpler as well. So next, got that. Make a Node-RED flow to connect these systems. So Node-RED is a visual programming tool. I use it all the time in lots of different prototypes and projects because I can literally weave together different bits of code and APIs to make something. So it makes it really, really quick and fast to make things and push stuff together, and also quick to debug them. So if something goes wrong, it's just a case of just connecting a debug node and figuring something out, and that can be a really nice, quick process. So for doing infrastructure stuff, for enabling and connecting stuff together, that's brilliant, because I don't need to write more code that I need to debug. I just connect these things together, and I'm good. Next, I need to make a Django app to host the results. So I need to learn a bit of Heroku and use my Django skills. So I do loads of Python and Django development work, so that's easy for me. So I can push that back in the sprint because I know I just need like a couple of hours to put something together. And that became the website. So lovinggrace.controlledfrenzy.co.uk. There is a shorter link at the end. And that's where all the images of the shadows of the ghosts we took are stored online, and that's where all the data is there. So we can recall that data later and reuse that in something. But that's a quick app that goes online, and we've got that. You can see where this starts getting more complicated. Next, I need the social media integration for sharing. So now I've got that Django thing, I can connect that up to Twitter. And the company that was on the stall next to me, OsoChimp, which just have their company is, you hire them for your event, and as soon as someone tweets on a hashtag with a picture, they have a printer that prints something out. Okay, brilliant. That's something there. That's easy to integrate. I know that I can post stuff onto Twitter with a hashtag, upload an image. So as soon as someone's finished talking, 5 seconds away on the next stall, that picture pops out on the printer. So you've got that really nice connected piece, that connected installation, that connected work in there as well. And just knowing that integration means we can get that. Next, we kind of need to finalize the look, sound, and interaction. And we do that by just feeding back to people, showing it to as many people as possible, getting as much feedback as well. Biaga, who's a PhD student back up in Plymouth, really gave me good advice on keeping it simple, keeping the interaction there. So in kind of the stage version of this, you put headphones on before you start talking, and the headphones instruct you what to do. They instruct you what to say, and they kind of egg you on a little bit. And that came from actually thinking like, okay, someone's got a process, but I'm going to just put text on the screen, and the text is going to tell them what to do. But no one really reads that. But it's only through speaking and feeding back to people I went down that route. So getting the feedback, making that a part of the development, the constant production. Then I need to finalize the narrative and the conversation. Talking to people, sharing stuff again. One of the really interesting things that kind of came out with that process is gender. So for audio voice, I used one of the Mac OS X kind of voice assistant tools. I used a male voice, but of course, if I'm saying that screen is a representation of something, I'm immediately gendering something by using a male voice and saying that's calling out, that's talking about you. And that was a really interesting thing that came up. And it's something I want to explore more. It's something, that kind of representation and stuff. So how do I develop that out? How do I make a computer voice that is genderless? Because, of course, the thing on the screen doesn't have a gender. I don't know what's intuited into it, so I need to extend that out to other points in there as well. And I need to do infrastructure stuff, so I need to make sure I've got cover for the day, so I can actually step away from my installation and go to the toilet or go do other talks. So making sure that there's someone there. And I need to do stuff, and on top of all of that, I need to sort the AI part, which opens up questions with prototyping. So I could use TensorFlow and a massive GPU cluster to train something, train algorithms and machine learning tools myself. Or I can use IBM Watson, which is a bunch of REST APIs that does it all for me. I went with the APIs. And that opens a really interesting question with kind of microservices and systems design is actually now you don't really need to build a lot of it. A lot of work, a lot of complex systems is done for you, including these AI systems. So we were using the tone analysis API and the personality analysis API, which IBM kind of promote as ways of understanding the tone of a conversation that someone's having on in a customer service call, and personality, and the personality API was developed with an idea of creating something that could read a CV or a covering letter and giving you an idea of what that person might be. So if you have 1,000 CVs, you feed them through the tone analysis and the personality analysis, and then you get numbers on that person. And then you just pick the top 100 numbers, and then you ask them for an interview, or you ask them for the next step as well. So these tools and services suddenly enable all these sorts of stuff. And as we were saying earlier, they can all be reused, they can all be re-engineered and turned into things that reflect back on themselves. So I've got all those systems, I've got all those things. And I have to keep on top of it myself. I have to be my own Scrum manager and my project manager. So Christian asked me a very, very valid question, even just yesterday. So if you're one person, how do you do a stand-up? How do you keep on top of yourself? How do you manage yourself? So the technique I use is I use Trello. I get everything out, and this becomes my worry wall. So as I'm building up towards a deadline, towards delivering something, I get everything out into Trello. So everything I'm thinking about, what emails do I need to respond to? What client work needs to be dealt with? Do I need a shower? What do I need to get done? Like little things in there as well, because I'm trying to juggle all these sorts of stuff and deliver something and deliver the business side as well. So it's important to get everything out there and being able to categorize that and focus on that. And this was building up to this was something I was doing every day before that deadline. So I kind of get everything out and I categorize it into these 5 things. So the first one is, what am I waiting for? Am I waiting on Sam to finish the sound work for me? Am I waiting for some bits of post to arrive, some bits of kit and things? That goes into one thing, that gets that out of my head. What can I do now? What can I do now? What can I deliver today? What will I focus on? What can I focus on later? What can I push off to tomorrow? What am I going to do on the day? So what do I need to sort on the day, like space and time and things? And lastly, what am I going to push off for the future? So every day, there's a question, what do I cut? What do I push back? What do I simplify? What do I bring down to make sure I'm happy with what I deliver on that day, on that deadline as well? So kind of, it's all to do with kind of cutting things and bringing stuff back and making sure you can get there. And of course, because it's an interactive installation and it's a prototype, you can fudge a few things, you can fake some stuff as well. You can simplify things, and it doesn't have to be a complex digital system because your audience aren't experiencing it as a complex digital system. They're seeing it as something that's just novel that they're playing around with, and oh, look, something happens, and that's an interesting conversation. They don't see the complexity behind it, so you can hide that. You don't necessarily need to build that out because it's not there. It's not really in there. And you don't have to be a perfectionist as well. So I love this quote from Zay Frank. Perfectionism may look good in his shiny shoes, but he's a little bit of a, and no one invites him to their pool parties. And that's exactly the thing, is like, I could work on this forever and ever and ever and ever, but I'd never ship it. I'd never get it out there. So it's the whole, let's just ship it. Let's just get it out there and let's see what people think of it. See what the people errors are. Let's get it out of our system and then reflect back and then see what's in there as well. Wait for Tony to finish taking a picture. And then thinking, as I was saying, like, what am I really making? Like I said, it's not the complex digital system and all those different points and systems that I talked about earlier. It's the interaction. It's the moment. It's the thing that people do in that space. Everything else is just in service of that interaction. Everything else is just in service of that narrative. And that's what you're making, and that's what you can provide and put time into as well. And that's what you can develop more of. So now we get back to kind of looping back with kind of closing this kind of retrospective and thinking out to the future and thinking what's to be developed. And yeah, I achieved my goal. I achieved making an algorithmic piece of art as a provocative prototype. It gave me loads of different questions and loads of different things to explore and ideas. But importantly, I have to make sure that I think it's a small start. It's only just like one release. And it's the first version. It's the minimum prototype. Not even the minimum viable prototype or the viable product. It's just the first step. It's just me getting something out of my system and making something, getting an idea out that I can then evolve and build over time. There's no like grand multi-movie narrative cinematic universe here going on. It's just the first thing. It's just me getting something out of my system to do something. And it leads me to think, like, where's the future and what can I do? How can I expand this idea? A lot of what I've talked about, kind of hinted at, is this connected narrative, connected systems. So could the data that's been collected be shown as an API? And does that mean these ghosts and shadows could follow you throughout an entire exhibition or a museum? So if you start with this, then you go into a VR piece, and then, oh, there's your version of you. Or there's an Internet of Things gallery, and they're being affected by your personality and what you said and what you started with there as well. Kind of all like big concepts and things and stuff to go with. And there are, alongside with that, there are kind of like shortcuts towards making something better. So one of those is just upgrading the medium. So upgrading the thing you project on. So there is these holographic black meshes that you can use. Or these. So this is the Porsche museum, and these are sound showers. So these are speakers that are very, very directional. So you have to be standing in a specific place to hear a narrative and hear some music. So you just step out that circle, you can't hear it. So you have kind of an interaction and things. So it's beyond putting on the headphones, it's let's move into the space, but that stuff's really expensive. Or maybe you build the scope and add new interactions, add new projections. But of course, going back, that's all money. That's all money to invest in. So that's something to do if the budget's there, if I've got the grants for the arts, if I can afford that. But now it's more continue to invest the time, continue developing it out, and looping through back this process. So we're back at the start now. We're back at me thinking, right, what's the next thing I can do? What's the next thing I can develop? Where's the next deadline going to be? Where's the next thing I'm going to show? How am I going to strain that, and what am I going to build? And how do I reflect back on that as well? So it becomes just prototype, making something new, making something again, developing, releasing, making the act of showing something, making the act of pushing something out there as mundane as possible. So it's just rocking up and showing something, and then making those releases easy to do. And then eventually I might get to something that I might call a minimum viable product. I might take the part one name off, or it's an entire exhibition or something, but I don't know what that's going to be. I still don't know what's there, but then I've got to loop that back and think, I'm constantly learning in this process, and I'm building my own business, building my own confidence and what I'm talking about. And really, I'm more making this. I'm making myself as a minimum viable professional, as someone who can communicate and do these things, but then using these projects to build out that possibility, focusing on myself and building that kind of team of one out there as well. And I'll hand it back, and I'll say, and always keeping this in mind. So always thinking that I'm as much a product, in fact, you are as much a product of your process as what you create. So the process you go through of developing something or building something, you change in that process as well. You evolve. You're not the same person from one at the start of the sprint as you are at the end. You change a lot because you've learned a lot and you've developed a lot and you've created new experiences. So you're a product as well. You're as much a release, you're as much a valuable part of that process as the thing you make. And I'll leave it to finish off, I'll leave it back to hand it back to Zay Frank's quote. And this is something I've loved and always has been with me for a long time. So let me not think of my work only as a stepping stone to something else. And if it is, let me become fascinated with the shape of the stone. And as soon as Tony's finished taking a picture, I'll finish that and open it up for questions. Thank you very much. Oh, at the back there. Mm-hmm. So it's using the information and the data we get back from those APIs. So we get back a bunch of numbers, and then we feed those numbers into the visual algorithm, which generates the shape, generates the things you're seeing as well. So we're taking data from one place, sending it to the other. As we were saying earlier, I've kind of deliberately obfuscated the numbers that go into there as well. So it is a representation of that data, a representation of what's there, but it's explicit. I've personally divorced myself from knowing, okay, that color means it's happy, or this shape means they're extroverted, or something in there as well. So I've kind of stepped back from that and let someone else intuit that as well, let the audience intuit that part of the visual.
You talk about constraints. One of them clearly is you, as in your
Yes.
one. Have you got any desire to open this up and open source it and get other people to learn?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's one of those things where none of this is possible without the open source technology and software. So one of the next steps for this is to open source everything, make everything available, let people build on top of the API, build on top of the data source of things that are collected, as well as build on top of the visualization system. So doing this talk at the land registry last week, we had some interesting ideas of what this might look like if you fed land registry data into the same algorithm. What kind of shapes and things might you get? Could you develop it from a one-to-one microphone to let's put this microphone in the middle of a meeting and see what emotion and what thing emerges, what ghost emerges out of that meeting? And can you leave it behind for someone else in there as well? So starting to have lots more conversations with other people about bringing them into the fold, bringing them into this system, and thinking of using just the standard ways we collaborate digitally of open source, of APIs, and then bringing that in and making that part of kind of the artwork and the creative process as well. Thank you. Brilliant. And one more for Tony.
So, Future Sync 18 is happening next year. We're going to build something equally awesome.
Oh, yeah, just bigger and more fancier. So have you got a budget for those sound showers as well, Tony? Or
Yeah. Follow-up question is, do I need paid next year?
it'd be nice. Well, no, it's all fine. So cool. Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. I think we'll leave it there and let you all get your food. So thank you very much.